Jai Shri Ram. Now we come to Canto 65. The summary of the canto. When the emperor did not wake up, even though roused by means of panegyrics sung by bards, accompanied by musical instruments played upon for the same purpose, the ladies of the gynecium conclude by other means that the king is dead, and soon after commences the loud wail of Kaushalya, Sumitra, and other queens. When the night had ended, there arrived forthwith at the residence of the aforesaid emperor, early next morning, panegyrists, highly cultured ministers and bards whose information was of a superior kind, as well as singers capable of distinguishing the difference in the tone of a veena, etc., and singing according to their different styles. The sound of the praises uttered by the aforesaid bards and others who were glorifying the king and by whom benedictions were pronounced in a loud voice actually pervaded the interior of the palaces in the form of echo, while the aforesaid minstrels for their part were engaged in uttering praises. Those who sang with the clapping of hands thereupon clapped their hands, recounting the marvellous feats of the rulers of Ayodhya. Nay, roused by that sound of clapping, birds appearing in the royal palace and perched on the boughs of trees, as well as confined in a cage, uttered forth their notes. The holy words uttered by Brahmans and parrots, etc., as well as notes of veena and the benedictory portion set to music of the epic verses composed by Brahmans in praise of the king filled that palace. Then attendants, mostly consisting of women and eunuchs of unimpeachable conduct and proficient in service, stood ready to serve as usual. Servants who knew how to conduct the bath of emperors brought at the appropriate hour and in the prescribed manner water scented with sandal paste in pitchers of gold. Virtuous women, largely consisting of virgins, whose very sight is believed to be propitious, likewise brought cows, etc., whose very touch is considered to be auspicious. Articles worth sipping, the first thing, viz., the water of the holy Ganga, water in which the feet of a deity have been washed, and so on, and articles of dress, toilet, etc. All that was worth bringing within sight of the emperor at the time of his waking for his good luck, and was endowed with all auspicious characteristics and all that was praiseworthy of excellent quality and possessed of charm, was kept ready in accordance with the scriptural ordinance. Till sunrise, all the king's retinue stood immensely eager to see the king, and apprehensive as to what mishap had befallen the king, who had not yet come out of the gynecium. Now, approaching their consort, those ladies other than Kaushalya and the other principal queens for their part, who were close to the couch of King Koshala, the king of Koshala, began to rouse him by calling him in gentle and polite words and touching his person. Nevertheless, on touching his couch with reverence and skill, the ladies, whose behavior on the occasion was perfectly justifiable, could not detect any sign of life whatsoever in him. Those ladies who knew the condition of a body in slumber did not discover any throbbing in the heart, the pulse, and the other organs. They were accordingly seized with tremor, apprehensive as they were about the king's life, and looked unsteady like the ends of reeds standing against a stream. Now, on seeing the condition of the emperor at that time, a certainty rose in the mind of the doubting ladies about the disaster in the form of death which was apprehended. Being fast asleep, Kaushalya and Sumitra too, who had been prostrated with grief caused by separation from their sons, would not wake up as though they had been overtaken by death. Shorn of splendor and divested of her native color, nay, stricken and laid prostrate with grief, Kaushalya did not shine brightly as before, any more than a star engulfed in darkness. laying asleep close to the king, who was now dead and therefore pale. Kaushalya too did not shine brightly any more than the king, nor did Queen Sumitra, who lay asleep next to Kaushalya, and whose face was bathed in tears of grief. Seeing both the aforesaid queens Kaushalya and Sumitra asleep at that time, the inmates of the gymnasium concluded that King Dashrath had breathed his last while asleep. Then those pretty women loudly wailed. Afflicted as they were, like female elephants in a forest, the leader of whose herd had strayed away from their abode. Roused all of a sudden by the noise of their wailing, Kaushalya and Sumitra too shook off their slumber. Looking at the emperor and touching him and crying loudly, "Ah, my lord!" Kaushalya and Sumitra too dropped on the ground. Tossing on the floor and covered with dust, the daughter of the ruler of Koshala, a principality of that name to the south of the kingdom of Koshala, and later merged in it, did not look charming any more than a shooting star fallen from the heavens. The king having expired, all those ladies beheld Kaushalya fallen on the ground like the dead wife of a Naga, a semi-divine being credited with a human face with serpent-like lower extremities. Then the king's wives, Kaikai, and others who were all weeping, soul-stricken with grief as they were, fell down, consciousness having departed from them. That tremendous noise already heard in the gymnasium was supplemented by those wailing ladies by means of their own lamentation, solemn by which it rendered the house all the more noisy. That gymnasium of the king, who had now met his appointed end, was thronged with men and women who felt greatly alarmed, flurried, and overexcited, and was filled with a tumultuous wail on all sides, and crowded with the king's relations, who were stricken with deep agony. Joy had suddenly disappeared from it, and it wore a miserable aspect and presented a perplexed appearance. Concluding the illustrious Dashrath, the foremost of kings, to be deceased, and surrounding him on all sides, his consorts for their part, who were profusely shedding tears, greatly afflicted as they were, piteously wailed like helpless women clasping his arms. Thus ends Canto 65 in the AYODHYAKAND of the glorious Ramayan of Valmiki, the work of a rishi and the oldest epic. Now we come to Canto 66. The summary of the canto. Resting the head of the lifeless monarch on her own lap and severely reproaching Kaikai, Kaushalya grievously mourns for Sri Ram and other exiles. Holding back Kaushalya, who was lamenting with her arms placed round her deceased husband's bosom, and consigning the emperor's dead body to a trough filled with oil, the ministers and other functionaries returned each to his own abode in the evening. Beholding the aforesaid emperor, whose spirit was now in heaven, and who looked like a fully extinguished fire, a waterless ocean, and a lustreless sun, and clasping the king's head, Kaushalya, who was stricken with grief in divers ways, spoke as follows to Kaikai, her eyes full of tears. Having your desire fulfilled, O cruel Kaikai, be satisfied. Having done with the king, O woman of evil conduct, confidently enjoy the throne which has no more enemies. Forsaking me, Ram has departed for the forest, while my husband has ascended to heaven. As such, I cannot live any longer than a woman bereft of her companions on a perilous road. Truly speaking, what woman other than Kaikai, who has cast all piety to the winds, would survive leaving her husband, a veritable god to her? A greedy man does not cognize his own faults any more than he who partakes of forbidden dish. The race of the Raghus has been destroyed by Kaikai at the instigation of Mantra. Hearing of Ram having been exiled with his consort, Sita, by the king as urged by Kaikai to an unbecoming act, King Janak too will feel greatly perturbed, as I do, that pious Ram, who is possessed of eyes resembling lotus petals, and who, having disappeared from his place, even though living, does not know me to have been deprived of my master and husband today. The daughter of Janak, the ruler of Videha territory, who is engaged in agreeable austerities in the shape of service to her exiled husband, living in a forest and undeserving of suffering, will feel sorely afflicted in the forest. Greatly alarmed to hear during the nights the noise of howling wild beasts and birds possessing the habit of uttering a fearful cry, she will cling in terror to Ram, a sign of Raghu. Anxiously thinking again and again of Sita, a princess of the Videha territory, and overwhelmed with grief, Janak too, who is aged and who has few issues, viz., a daughter named Urmila, wife of Lakshman, and a goddaughter in the person of Sita, will surely give up the ghost. I too, devoted as I am to my husband, shall accordingly meet my destined end this very day. Nay, embracing this body of my husband, I shall enter the fire that will be prepared for his funeral. The ministers then reverently removed from that place the wretched Kaushalya, who was sore stricken with agony and lamented holding the dead monarch in close embrace. Consigning the deceased emperor at that time to a trough filled with oil, the ministers, as commanded by Vasishtha and other family priests, then performed all the duties connected with the preservation of the king's dead body, etc., required to be done next. Knowing, as they did, everything connected with the disposal of the dead body, the aforesaid councillors would not, of course, perform the king's funeral without the presence of a son. Hence, they preserved the body of the king. Coming to know of the king having been laid by the ministers in the trough filled with oil, the aforesaid ladies lamented, exclaiming as follows: "Ah, the king is dead." Throwing up their arms, the wretched ladies, crying with their faces containing cascades in the form of eyes, sore stricken with grief as they were, piteously wailed as follows: "Ah, wherefore, O Emperor, do you abandon us? Already bereft of Ram, of unfailing promise, whoever speaks kindly to all. Forsaken by Ram and deprived of our husband, how shall we live in proximity to our co-wife Kaikai of wicked intentions? That glorious Ram was indeed our protector and Lord as well as yours. Self-controlled as he is, having relinquished the royal fortune, he has departed to the forest. Nonplussed through adversity and treated disrespectfully by Kaikai, how shall we live without you and that heroic prince? Whom else will she, by whom have been abandoned the king as well as Ram and Sita and the very mighty Lakshman, not abandon? Bathed in tears and seized with enormous grief, those charming consorts of Dashrath, tossed about on the ground, divested of joy as they were. Bereft of its high-souled ruler, King Dashrath, the city of Ayodhya did not shine any more that night, without stars or a woman deprived of her husband, with its men bathed in tears and women of high pedigree raising a cry of distress, and its crossroads and entrances of houses looking desolate. The city did not look charming as before. The king, for his part, having departed for heaven due to grief caused by separation from his son and daughter-in-law, and the king's consorts tossing on the floor, the sun suddenly disappeared, its rays having ceased to be diffused, and the night actually fell, darkness having commenced to spread. Those friends and relations of the emperor that stood assembled on the occasion did not favor his cremation in the absence of a son. Therefore, considering the king as having assumed an appearance beyond conception, they laid the king in that trough which served as his bed. Bereft of Dashrath, an exalted soul, the city with its roads and crossroads, full of men whose throats were choked with tears that ran past their throats, looked like the firmament shone of splendor in the absence of the sun, and further resembled a night with its host of stars gone out of sight. Coming together in batches and reproaching Bharat's mother, men and women in the city felt distressed at that time on the king's demise and found no rest. Thus ends Canto 66 in the AYODHYAKAND of the glorious Ramayana of Valmiki, a work of a rishi and the oldest epic. Jai Shri Ram.